I met Daniel when I was 23, fresh out of college with a degree in art history and dreams bigger than my tiny studio apartment. He walked into the coffee shop where I was sketching during my lunch break, and somehow, in the chaos of the afternoon rush, our eyes met. He had this warm smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room, even though the place was packed with customers shouting orders and baristas calling out names. "Is this seat taken?" he asked, gesturing to the chair across from me. I shook my head and he sat down with his laptop and a cup of black coffee. We didn't talk much that first day, just exchanged smiles when our eyes happened to meet. But the next day, he was there again, and the day after that. By the fourth day, he finally spoke. "You're really talented," he said, nodding toward my sketchbook. "What are you drawing?" I felt my cheeks flush as I turned the book toward him, showing him a rough sketch of the coffee shop's interior. "I'm trying to capture the feeling of this place," I said. "The way the light comes through those windows in the afternoon, how it makes everything feel warm and safe." He looked at the drawing for a long moment, then back at me. "That's exactly what it feels like," he said. "You got it perfectly." That was the beginning. We started meeting there every day, then graduating to actual dates. He took me to art galleries, remembered that I liked my coffee with cream but no sugar, picked me up after work when it rained. He worked at his family's real estate development company, came from money, but he never made me feel small because of it. Instead, he seemed genuinely interested in my world, in my dreams of maybe opening a small art studio someday. 6 months later, he proposed on the beach. It was the same beach where we'd had our first real date, where we'd walked barefoot in the sand and talked about everything and nothing until the sun set. He got down on one knee as the waves crashed behind him, held out a ring that caught the golden light, and said, "You make my life mean something. Will you marry me?" I said yes without hesitation, feeling like the luckiest woman in the world. Before the wedding, his father, Richard, asked to speak with me privately. He was a shrewd businessman, the kind of man who'd built an empire from nothing, and I was honestly a little intimidated. We sat in his study, surrounded by leather-bound books and the smell of expensive cigars. "My dear," he said, his voice gentle despite his imposing presence, "I can see you're a good person. My son, he's been spoiled, given everything too easily. I just hope you'll be patient with him." I didn't fully understand what he meant at the time. I just nodded, smiled, and promised I would take care of his son. Looking back now, I wonder if he saw something I couldn't see yet, something that would only become clear with time. The first few years were beautiful, or at least they seemed that way. Daniel bought us a gorgeous house in a good neighborhood, gave me a credit card with no limit, threw elaborate birthday parties for me every year. When our first child was born, a beautiful baby girl we named Emma, he held her so carefully, kissed my forehead and whispered, "Thank you for giving me a family." 2 years later came our son, Jake. Our life looked perfect from the outside, and for a while I believed it was perfect on the inside too. But there were small things, little moments that I pushed aside because I loved him, because I wanted to believe in us. When I mentioned wanting to take a design course, he laughed and said, "Honey, you don't need to do that." I take care of everything. Why stress yourself out? When I talked about maybe going back to work once the kids were in school, he put his arm around me and said, "Isn't staying home with the children important work? Besides, you're so good at it." When friends complimented my cooking at dinner parties, he would pat my shoulder proudly and say, "My wife, I taught her everything she knows." I never questioned it. I thought it was love. I thought he was protecting me, caring for me. I threw myself into being the perfect wife and mother. I made home-cooked meals every night, kept the house spotless, volunteered at the kids' school, hosted dinner parties for Daniel's business associates. I became so good at reading his moods, at anticipating what he needed before he asked. If he had a stressful day, I knew to have his favorite scotch ready and the house quiet. If he had a good day, I knew he'd want to celebrate, so I'd put on a nice dress and smile through whatever restaurant he chose, even if I was exhausted. The years blurred together in a comfortable rhythm. Morning coffees, school drop-offs, grocery shopping, PTA meetings, family dinners. Daniel would come home. We'd talk about his day at the office. He'd play with the kids for a bit before they went to bed. Then we'd watch TV together, his arm around my shoulders, and I'd feel content, safe, loved, or what I thought was love. In our 15th year of marriage, Richard got sick. Cancer, the doctors said, too advanced to treat aggressively. I spent those last months helping care for him, sitting by his bedside, reading to him when he was too weak to do it himself. He held my hand one afternoon, his voice barely a whisper. "My dear girl," he said, "I've left instructions in my will. Important ones. Remember to read it carefully when the time comes." I nodded, tears streaming down my face. I loved him like a father, maybe more than my own father who'd passed when I was young. "I will," I promised. He squeezed my hand weakly and smiled. A week later, he was gone. It started in our 16th year of marriage. Daniel hired a new secretary, a 26-year-old woman named Ashley. She was bright, energetic, the kind of person who lit up a room when she walked in. I met her at the company's holiday party that year. She shook my hand enthusiastically and said, "Mrs. Morrison, I've heard so much about you. Daniel talks about you all the time." I smiled, thanked her, thought nothing of it. Why would I? I trusted my husband. We'd been together for almost 2 decades, but slowly, things began to change. Daniel started coming home later. "Big project at work," he'd say, loosening his tie as he walked in at 9, then 10, then 11 at night. "We're trying to close this deal." Ashley's been incredible, staying late to help me with all the paperwork. He stopped asking about my day, stopped noticing when I got my hair cut or wore a new dress. When I tried to talk to him about the kids, he'd nod absently, his eyes on his phone. I'd catch him smiling at his screen sometimes, a soft smile I hadn't seen in years, not since we were young and everything was new between us. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was just a tired mother of 2, reading too much into things. Maybe this was just what happened after 17 years of marriage. The spark dims, routine sets in. That's normal, right? But deep down, in a place I didn't want to acknowledge, I felt something shifting. It was like standing on ground that you thought was solid, only to feel it start to tremble beneath your feet. Then came the day that changed everything. It was a Thursday afternoon, and I'd made Daniel's favorite meal, pot roast with all the sides he loved. I packed it up carefully in containers, thinking I'd surprise him at the office. Maybe we could have lunch together like we used to do years ago. When I got to the building, his secretary's desk was empty. I walked toward his office, the containers warm in my hands, a smile on my face. The door was slightly ajar. Through the gap, I saw them. Daniel was leaning against his desk, and Ashley was standing close to him, closer than a secretary should stand to her boss. He reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, the same gesture he used to do with me. She giggled, a young, bright sound, and put her hand on his chest. They weren't kissing, but the intimacy of the moment was unmistakable. The way they looked at each other, the way the air seemed to shimmer between them. My heart stopped. Actually stopped. I stood there, frozen, watching my husband touch another woman with a tenderness he hadn't shown me in months, maybe years. The container slipped from my numb fingers, but I caught them before they hit the ground. I turned and walked away as quietly as I'd come. I left the food with his assistant, mumbled something about Daniel being busy, and drove home in a daze. I sat in the car in our driveway for an hour, just sat there, staring at nothing, trying to breathe through the pain that felt like a physical weight on my chest. I didn't confront him that night, or the next night, or the night after that. Instead, I watched. I paid attention in a way I hadn't in years, and once I started seeing it, I couldn't unsee it. The way he'd smile at his phone and quickly turn it over when I walked into the room, the new cologne he started wearing, the extra care he took with his appearance in the mornings, the late nights that became more frequent, the distance that grew between us like a chasm I couldn't cross. I tried everything I could think of to fix it, to win him back. I started cooking his favorite meals again, really putting effort into them. I bought new clothes, got my hair done at an expensive salon, started working out to get back the body I'd had before the kids. I initiated intimacy, tried to reconnect with him. But every attempt was met with indifference that cut deeper than anger would have. "I already ate at the office," he'd say, barely glancing at the dinner I'd spent hours preparing. "Why are you wearing so much makeup?" "Are you going somewhere?" he'd ask, suspicion rather than appreciation in his voice. "I'm tired. Can we just sleep?" he'd respond when I tried to touch him, turning away from me in bed. I kept trying. I asked about his work, really tried to engage with what he was doing. "How's the new development project going?" I'd ask over breakfast. He'd shrug. "It's complicated." "You wouldn't understand. I suggested we go out on dates, just the two of us like we used to." "I'm swamped with work right now," he'd say. "Maybe next month." Next month never came. I bought tickets to a concert for a band he loved, reminded him a week in advance, got a babysitter. The night of the show, he came home at 10, having forgotten about it. "Sorry," he said, not sounding sorry at all. "Work ran late." The worst part wasn't the rejection, it was the indifference. If he'd been angry, if we'd fought, at least that would have been something. But there was nothing. I was becoming invisible in my own marriage. I'd talk, and he'd nod without hearing. I'd reach for his hand, and he'd pull away to check his phone. I'd tell him I loved him, and he'd respond with, "Yeah, you too," in the same tone he'd used to acknowledge the weather forecast. One night, about 6 months after I'd seen them together in his office, I broke. We were lying in bed, him on his phone, me staring at the ceiling, feeling the distance between us like it was a physical thing. I started crying, silent tears at first, then sobs I couldn't control. He looked over at me, annoyed rather than concerned. "What's wrong now?" he asked. Not, "Are you okay?" or "How can I help?" but "What's wrong now?" like I was a burden, a problem to be dealt with. "Are you on your period or something?" That's when I knew. Really knew. He didn't love me anymore. Maybe he never had. Not really. Maybe I'd just been convenient, the perfect accessory to his perfect life. And now he'd found a newer model. I held on for 2 more months, hope dying slowly like a flower deprived of light. But finally, I couldn't take the uncertainty anymore. I needed to know for sure. Not because I wanted to catch him, but because I needed to know I wasn't crazy, that I wasn't imagining the death of my marriage. I hired a private investigator, a woman named Sarah who'd been recommended by a friend who'd gone through something similar. "I just need to know the truth," I told her, my voice shaking. She nodded with understanding in her eyes that told me she'd seen this story before. The photos came a week later. Daniel and Ashley at a hotel, his hand on the small of her back as they walked through the lobby. Daniel and Ashley at a cafe holding hands across the table, looking at each other the way he used to look at me. Daniel and Ashley in his car, kissing, her hands in his hair. Each photo was a knife to my heart, but I looked at every single one. I needed to see it. I needed the truth to be undeniable. I sat at the kitchen table with those photos spread in front of me, and I waited for the devastation to hit. I expected to scream, to cry, to break down, but instead I felt empty, hollow. Like someone had scooped out everything inside me and left just a shell. Maybe I'd known all along. Maybe part of me had been preparing for this moment for months. The crying came later, in the shower where no one could hear, in the car while waiting to pick up the kids from school, in the middle of the night while Daniel slept soundly beside me, unaware or uncaring that my whole world was crumbling. I gave him one chance to tell me the truth, just one. We were having dinner, one of those silent, awkward dinners that had become our norm. The kids were at their friends' houses. It was just us, the clink of forks against plates the only sound. I put down my fork, looked at him directly, and asked, "Are you having an affair?" He looked up from his phone, irritation flashing across his face. "What? Why would you ask me that?" He said, not no, not of course not, but answering my question with a question. "I'm asking you directly," I said, proud of how steady my voice was. "Are you or aren't you?" The silence stretched between us. I watched emotions play across his face, surprise, then calculation, then something that looked almost like relief. He sighed, put down his phone, and looked at me with eyes that held no warmth. "You know what? Yes. Yes, I am. And honestly, I'm relieved you finally figured it out. I've been miserable in this marriage for years. No apology, no explanation, no remorse, just cold, brutal honesty. I want a divorce," he continued. "I'm done pretending to be happy in a life that doesn't excite me anymore." I sat there stunned not by the confession but by the cruelty of it. "Just like that?" I whispered. 17 years, 2 children, and you're just done?" He shrugged. "People change." "I've changed. You're a good mother, a good housekeeper, but there's nothing interesting about you anymore." Ashley makes me feel alive again. Each word was designed to hurt, and they did. But they also did something else. They woke me up. This man, who I'd devoted nearly 2 decades of my life to, saw me as boring, uninteresting, replaceable. And suddenly, I didn't want to fight for someone who thought so little of me. The next 2 months were the darkest of my life. Daniel moved into the guest room while we figured out the logistics. Logistics. That's what our marriage had been reduced to. He'd come and go at strange hours, sometimes not coming home at all. I still cooked dinner, still helped the kids with homework, still kept the house running, moving through my days like a ghost. On the outside, I functioned. On the inside, I was drowning. There were nights I cried until I had no tears left, curled up on the bathroom floor so the kids wouldn't hear. There were days I couldn't get out of bed until I absolutely had to, forcing myself up only when it was time to get Emma and Jake ready for school. I'd look in the mirror and not recognize the woman staring back at me. When did I get so thin? When did those dark circles appear under my eyes? When did I start looking so defeated? But something else started happening too. My friend Rachel, who'd been through a divorce herself, convinced me to see a therapist. "You need help processing this," she said gently. "You can't do it alone." So I started going to therapy every week. Dr. Stevens, a kind woman in her 50s, became my lifeline. She helped me understand that what I was feeling was grief, not just for my marriage, but for the life I'd thought I had, for the future I'd imagined, for the version of myself I'd lost along the way. "Tell me," Dr. Stevens asked in one session, "when was the last time you did something just for yourself?" Something that made you happy, not as a wife or a mother, but as you. I sat there, unable to answer. I couldn't remember. I'd spent so many years being what everyone else needed that I'd forgotten who I was underneath all those roles. So I started small. I dug out my old sketchbooks, the ones I'd abandoned when I got married and didn't have time anymore. I started drawing again, just 15 minutes a day at first, then longer. I joined a yoga class. I started reading books I wanted to read, not just the parenting guides and cooking magazines I'd limited myself to. Slowly, painfully, I started to remember who I'd been before I became Mrs. Daniel Morrison. I'd been someone with dreams, with passions, with a whole life ahead of me. What happened to that girl? Where did she go? I started journaling, writing down everything I felt, all the anger and pain and confusion. And one day, I wrote something that surprised me. Maybe he's right, I wrote. Maybe I did lose myself. But not because I'm boring, because I gave up everything I was to become what he wanted. And that's on me as much as it's on him. When Daniel finally brought me the divorce papers, I was ready. Not happy, not healed, but ready. He laid them on the kitchen counter one morning, his face impassive. "I had my lawyer draw these up," he said. "It's all pretty standard. You get the house, I'll pay child support. We'll share custody of the kids." I picked up the papers, read through them carefully. Everything was there, spelled out in cold legal language. The end of everything we'd built together, reduced to clauses and stipulations. "Do you have any questions?" he asked, like he was wrapping up a business meeting. I looked at him, really looked at him. This man I'd loved for so long. This man who'd held me when my father died, who'd been there when both our children were born, who I'd built a life with. And I realized I didn't recognize him anymore. Or maybe I'd never really known him at all. "Just one," I said. "Did you ever really love me?" He shifted uncomfortably. "Of course I did. Once. But people change. Love changes." I nodded slowly, picked up a pen, and signed my name. My hand didn't shake. I felt strangely calm, like I was watching myself from a distance. "There," I said, sliding the papers back to him. "It's done." He looked surprised, maybe even disappointed. Had he expected me to beg, to fight, to cry and plead with him to stay? "That's it?" he asked. "You're not going to try to change my mind?" I stood up, looked him in the eye, and said something I'd been practicing with Dr. Stevens. Why would I try to keep someone who doesn't want to stay? "You've made your choice. I'm making mine." For a split second, I saw something flicker across his face. Confusion, regret, but it was gone as quickly as it came. He picked up the papers, said he'd have his lawyer file them, and walked out. That night, after the kids were asleep, I sat alone in the living room. I took off my wedding ring, the ring I'd worn for 17 years, and set it on the coffee table. I stared at it for a long time, this little circle of gold that had meant everything and now meant nothing. I waited for the devastation to hit, for the grief to overwhelm me, but instead I felt something unexpected, relief, like I'd been holding my breath for years and could finally exhale. The marriage was over. The pretending was done. And for the first time in a long time, I could start thinking about what I wanted, not what everyone else needed from me. The divorce was finalized 3 months later. Daniel moved out completely, got an apartment closer to his office, closer to Ashley, though he didn't say that part. The kids took it hard, especially Emma, who was old enough to understand that everything was changing. "Why doesn't Daddy love you anymore?" she asked me one night, tears streaming down her face. I held her close and said, "Sometimes people grow apart, sweetheart. It doesn't mean he doesn't love you and your brother. That will never change." I threw myself into rebuilding my life. I enrolled in that design course I'd mentioned years ago, the one Daniel had dismissed. I was terrified on the first day, surrounded by students half my age, but the professor was encouraging. "You have a good eye," she told me after seeing my first project. "You should consider this professionally." The idea seemed impossible. I was 40 years old, a single mother, starting over, but maybe impossible wasn't the same as undoable. I started running in the mornings, something I'd never done before. At first, I could barely make it around the block, but slowly, I got stronger. I'd run along the beach sometimes, a different beach than the one where Daniel had proposed, and feel the wind on my face and remember what it felt like to be alive in my own body, not just a vessel for everyone else's needs. I reconnected with old friends, people I'd lost touch with over the years because I was always too busy with family obligations. We'd meet for coffee, for wine, for long talks that didn't revolve around kids or husbands or household management. The kids adjusted better than I'd expected. We established new routines, new traditions. Friday nights became pizza and movie night, just the three of us. I started really listening to them, not just managing them. Emma told me about a boy she liked at school, and instead of giving her a lecture about being too young for boys, I just listened and remembered what it felt like to be 13 with a crush. Jake showed me his drawings and I encouraged him, helped him develop his talent instead of dismissing it as just a phase. I heard through mutual friends that Daniel and Ashley were getting serious. It stung, but not as much as I'd expected. I didn't follow him on social media, didn't ask about him, tried not to think about what he was doing or who he was with. Some days were harder than others. Some days I missed having a partner, missed the idea of what we'd been, even if the reality had been dying for years. But mostly, I felt lighter, freer, like I'd been carrying a weight I didn't even realize was there until I set it down. 6 months after the divorce was finalized, an envelope arrived in the mail. Cream-colored, expensive paper, my name written in elegant calligraphy. I opened it with curiosity, then stared in disbelief at what was inside. It was an invitation to an engagement party. Daniel and Ashley's engagement party. And the location made my stomach drop. The beach. Our beach. The place where he'd proposed to me almost 2 decades ago. I read it 3 times trying to understand. Was this deliberate? Was he really so cruel or so oblivious that he'd chosen the place where our life together began to celebrate starting a life with someone else? Rachel, who was visiting when I opened it, saw my face and took the invitation from my hand. "What the hell?" she said, outraged. "Is he serious? You're not going to this, right? Please tell me you're not going." But as I sat there, a strange calmness came over me. "Actually," I said slowly, "I think I am going to go." Rachel looked at me like I'd lost my mind. "Why would you do that to yourself? It's just gonna hurt. It's like he's rubbing it in your face." I shook my head. Maybe. Or maybe I need this. I need to see him, see them together, and prove to myself that I'm really done, that I've moved on. That night, I remembered something I'd pushed to the back of my mind. After Richard's funeral, his lawyer, Mr. Peterson, had asked to meet with me privately. He'd read me a portion of the will that specifically mentioned me. The terms were clear and shocking. If Daniel divorced without legitimate cause, meaning infidelity, abuse, or abandonment on my part, he would forfeit his inheritance. The entire estate, worth millions, would go to charity instead. "Why are you telling me this?" I'd asked Mr. Peterson at the time. He'd given me a long look. "Because Richard wanted you to know. He said you'd understand when the time was right. He also said the choice of what to do with this information should be entirely yours. I'd put it out of my mind, too numb from grief and the collapse of my marriage to think about it. But now, holding this invitation, I thought about it again. I had power here. Power to hurt Daniel the way he'd hurt me. Power to take away something he valued. The question was, did I want to use it? I spent the next week thinking about what to do. Part of me wanted revenge, wanted to see his face when he realized what he'd given up, wanted to watch his perfect new life crumble. He deserved it, didn't he? After everything he'd put me through, all the pain and humiliation. But another part of me, the part that had been growing stronger through therapy and self-reflection, wasn't sure. "Why are you really considering going to this party?" Dr. Stevens asked in our session. "What do you hope to get out of it?" I thought about it carefully. "I want closure," I finally said, "but I also want to see if I'm strong enough to face them without falling apart. And I want to make a choice, consciously, about whether to use the will or not." Dr. Stevens nodded thoughtfully. "And what would using the will accomplish?" Really accomplish, I mean, not just the surface satisfaction, but deep down. That was the question, wasn't it? I went home and pulled out the copy of the will that Mr. Peterson had given me. I read it again, Richard's words still clear after all this time. He'd known his son wasn't strong, had probably seen the pattern before, maybe with Daniel's mother, maybe with other women. He'd tried to protect the people Daniel might hurt, but he'd also left the choice in my hands. Not a mandate, a choice. I made my decision. I would go to the party. I would bring the will. But what I did with it once I was there, that would depend on what I saw, what I felt in that moment. I wasn't going for revenge. I was going to face my past, to close that chapter of my life, and to make a choice about what kind of person I wanted to be moving forward. The woman Daniel had made me feel like, small and boring and worthless, or the woman I was becoming, strong and independent and worthy of respect. I bought a simple white dress for the occasion. Not flashy, not trying to compete with Ashley's youth and beauty. Just elegant, understated, confident. I got my hair done, not because I wanted to impress anyone, but because I wanted to feel good about myself. The night before the party, Emma asked me why I was going. "Daddy's getting married to that woman," she said, her voice sad. "Why do you want to see that?" I sat down next to her, took her hand. "Because sometimes, sweetheart, you have to face the things that hurt you to really move past them. I'm not going because I want Daddy back. I'm going because I need to prove to myself that I'm okay without him. Does that make sense?" She nodded slowly. "I think so. Are you going to make a scene?" I laughed. "No, baby. No scene. I'm just going to show up, say what I need to say, and leave. And then we're going to keep building our new life, okay?" She hugged me tight. "I love you, Mom. You're stronger than Daddy ever was." The beach looked beautiful. They'd set up white tents, strings of lights that would glow as the sun set, tables decorated with flowers. Guests were already arriving, people I recognized from Daniel's work, from the country club we used to belong to, from our old life. I took a deep breath, clutched the envelope in my hand, and walked toward the gathering. Heads turned as I approached. I could feel the whispers, see the shocked expressions. The ex-wife showing up at her replacement's engagement party. How scandalous. How inappropriate. Daniel saw me and his face went pale. Ashley, standing next to him in a flowing white dress that probably cost more than my car, looked confused and then concerned. I walked straight up to them, my heart pounding but my steps steady. "Congratulations," I said, my voice calm and clear. "I wanted to give you this in person." I held out the envelope. Daniel stared at it like it might explode. Ashley looked between us, uncertain. "What is it?" she asked. "Open it," I said simply. Daniel's hands shook slightly as he took the envelope. "Good. Let him be nervous. Let him wonder." He pulled out the document and I watched his face as he read. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes widened. Ashley tried to read over his shoulder, and I heard her sharp intake of breath. "What?" she said, her voice rising. "What does this mean?" "You told me you had money. You told me we'd be set." The people nearby had started to notice the commotion. They moved closer, curious. Daniel looked up at me and I saw fear in his eyes. Real fear. "You can't," he started to say. "You wouldn't." I let him sit with that fear for a moment. Let him feel what I'd felt all those months ago. The uncertainty, the helplessness, the realization that everything you thought was solid could crumble in an instant. Then I spoke loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "The will is very clear," I said. "Your father specified that if you divorced without legitimate cause, if you abandoned your family for selfish reasons, you'd lose everything. Every dollar, every property, every investment, all of it goes to charity." Ashley's face had gone from confused to angry. "You said you were rich!" She practically screamed at Daniel. "You said we'd have everything we wanted." He tried to calm her down, but she was spiraling. "Was any of it real? Or were you just using your father's money to impress me?" The crowd was openly watching now, their fancy engagement party turning into a soap opera. I could see some people recording on their phones. Good. Let them. Let everyone see. But then I held up my hand, and somehow everyone quieted down. "However," I said, and Daniel's head snapped up, hope flaring in his eyes. "I'm not here to use this will. In fact, I've already signed away my rights to enforce it." The shocked silence was profound. Ashley stopped mid-rant. Daniel's mouth fell open. I pulled out a second document from my purse, one I'd had Mr. Peterson prepare last week. "I signed this 3 days ago," I continued. "It relinquishes any claim I have to enforce the conditions of your father's will. As far as I'm concerned, the money is yours. All of it." Daniel stared at me like I'd grown a second head. "Why?" he managed to whisper. "Why would you do that?" I looked at him, really looked at him, and felt nothing. No love, no hate, not even much anger anymore. Just a kind of distant sadness for the time I'd wasted, and a strange gratitude that it had led me here, to this moment of absolute clarity. "Because I realized something," I said. "If I use that will, I'd still be letting you control my life. I'd still be reacting to you, defining myself in relation to you, and I'm done with that. I don't need your money. I don't need revenge. I need to be free of you. Completely." I turned to Ashley, and my voice softened. "You're young," I told her. "You're young enough to believe that love is supposed to feel exciting and dangerous and all-consuming. But let me tell you something I learned the hard way. Love isn't supposed to make you feel small. It's not supposed to erase who you are. Real love builds you up. It sees you, the real you, and celebrates that." When I met Daniel, I was someone with dreams and plans and a whole life ahead of me. By the time we divorced, I'd forgotten who that person even was. I'd molded myself into exactly what he wanted, and it still wasn't enough. Because the problem was never that I wasn't enough. The problem was that he never really saw me at all. Ashley's eyes were filling with tears, but I wasn't sure if they were tears of anger, sadness, or recognition. I looked back at Daniel one last time. I brought that will here today because I needed to know something about myself. I needed to know if I was the kind of person who would hurt someone back just because they hurt me. And now I know. I'm not. Not because you don't deserve it, but because I deserve better. I deserve to move forward without carrying all this bitterness and anger. The fear in his eyes had been replaced by something else. Confusion, maybe, or the beginning of understanding. "Do you know what the worst part of all this was?" I asked him. Not the affair. Not even the divorce. It was the way you looked at me in those last few months like I was nothing, like 17 years meant nothing, like I was boring and worthless and completely replaceable. That's what really hurt. But you know what? You were wrong. I'm not boring. I'm not worthless. I'm a woman who gave everything to her family, who sacrificed and loved and tried with everything she had. And there's nothing boring about that. There's nothing shameful about that. The beach was silent except for the sound of waves crashing. All these people dressed in their expensive clothes gathered to celebrate a new beginning, and instead they were witnessing an ending, a real one, final and complete. I took a deep breath of the salt air, the same air I'd breathed on this beach so many years ago when I'd said yes to a future I thought would last forever. But that girl was gone. And honestly, I didn't miss her that much anymore. I hope you'll be happy, I said to both of them, and I meant it. Not because I wanted good things for Daniel, necessarily, but because I wanted to be the kind of person who could mean it, who could wish her ex-husband well and walk away without looking back. I hope you find what you're looking for. But mostly, I hope you figure out who you are when you're not trying to impress anyone, when you're not chasing the next exciting thing. Because until you do, you're going to keep ending up in the same place, just with different people. I started to turn away, but Ashley's voice stopped me. "Wait," she said, and her voice was shaking. "Is that really why you came? Just to tell us that? You don't want anything from him?" I smiled, a genuine smile. "I already have everything I need," I said. "A roof over my head. 2 beautiful kids, a future that's mine to shape. What else is there?" I walked away then, my feet making soft impressions in the same sand where I'd walked hand in hand with Daniel all those years ago. But I wasn't that woman anymore. I was someone new, someone stronger, someone who knew her own worth. Behind me, I could hear the party starting to dissolve, people murmuring, Daniel and Ashley starting to argue again. But their voices grew fainter with each step I took, until all I could hear was the ocean and my own breathing and the sound of my own footsteps taking me away from the past and toward whatever came next. When I got to my car, I sat for a moment, just breathing. My phone buzzed, a text from Rachel. "How did it go?" "Are you okay?" I typed back, "I'm more than okay. I'm free." And for the first time in a long time, it was absolutely true. I drove home along the coast road, windows down, the evening air sweet and cool. When I pulled into my driveway, I saw the lights on in the house. Emma and Jake waiting for me. My real life, my true life. The one I was building with my own 2 hands. Life settled into a new rhythm, one that felt more genuine than anything I'd experienced in years. I finished my design course at the top of my class and started taking on small freelance projects. Nothing huge, just local businesses needing logos, families wanting custom artwork, that kind of thing. But it was mine. I was building something from nothing, using skills I'd almost let die, and every project felt like a small victory. I rented a small studio space in town, nothing fancy, just a converted garage with good light and enough room for a desk and my supplies. On the wall, I hung that first sketch I'd ever shown Daniel, the one from the coffee shop where we met. Not as a shrine to the past, but as a reminder that I'd always had talent, always had something to offer the world beyond being someone's wife or someone's mother. Emma and Jake were thriving too. We'd found our groove as a family of 3. I was more present with them now, more engaged, because I wasn't constantly trying to manage everyone's emotions and keep the peace. We talked about real things. When Emma came to me worried about her grades, we worked through it together instead of me just fixing it for her. When Jake had trouble with a bully at school, we role-played different scenarios until he felt confident handling it himself. One Saturday morning, I woke up early and went for my usual run on the beach. A different beach, one I discovered a few months ago, quieter and less crowded. As I ran, I thought about how far I'd come. A year ago, I'd been drowning in a marriage that was killing me slowly. 6 months ago, I'd signed divorce papers with shaking hands. 3 months ago, I'd walked away from a chance at revenge because I valued my peace more than his punishment. When I got back to my car, sweaty and breathing hard, my phone buzzed with an email notification. It was from a gallery in the city, one I'd submitted a portfolio to on a whim, not really expecting anything. "We'd love to feature your work in our Emerging Artists Showcase next month," it read. "Please contact us to discuss details." I sat in my car, reading and rereading the email, tears streaming down my face. But they were good tears, happy tears. Tears of someone who'd thought she'd lost everything and was discovering she'd actually found herself. The day of the gallery showing, I was nervous in a way I hadn't been in years. Not the anxious, people-pleasing nervousness of trying to be perfect for someone else, but the excited nervousness of putting yourself out there, of being seen for who you really are. I'd chosen to display a series of paintings about transformation, pieces that showed various stages of metamorphosis in nature, cocoons becoming butterflies, seeds breaking through soil, flowers blooming from darkness. Emma and Jake came with me, dressed up and proud. "Mom, your paintings are amazing," Emma said, squeezing my hand as we walked in. "You're like really talented. I never knew." That stung a little, but I understood. For years, I'd hidden my light, made myself smaller, convinced myself that my dreams didn't matter. How could my kids have known who I was when I'd forgotten myself? The gallery was filling up with people. Some I knew, most I didn't. Rachel was there, of course, along with a few other friends. Dr. Stevens even came, smiling warmly as she looked at my work. "You've come so far," she told me quietly. "I'm proud of you." Then I saw someone I didn't expect. Mr. Peterson, Richard's lawyer, standing in front of one of my paintings, the one titled Liberation. He turned when I approached and smiled. "Richard would have loved these," he said. "He always said you had something special, something his son never appreciated." I felt tears prick my eyes. "I miss him," I said. "He was kinder to me than his own son ever was." Mr. Peterson nodded. He knew. That's why he wrote the will the way he did. Not to punish Daniel, but to protect you. To give you a choice, a way out if you needed it. "But I gave it up," I said. "I walked away from all that money." He smiled. "I know. And that's exactly what Richard hoped you'd do. Not because he wanted you to suffer, but because he wanted you to be free. Money would have tied you to Daniel forever, kept you looking back. By letting it go, you let all of it go." I'd never thought about it that way, but he was right. The will had been a test, not of Daniel, but of me. A chance to choose between revenge and freedom, and I'd chosen freedom. The best revenge I've learned isn't destroying the person who hurt you. It's building a life so full and beautiful that they become irrelevant to your story. Daniel was a chapter in my life, an important one that taught me valuable lessons. But he's not the whole book. The whole book is still being written, and I'm the one holding the pen. And that, more than any amount of money, more than any public humiliation I could have inflicted, that is true freedom. That is true victory. That is everything.